Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to another Museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator at Paul Orselli Workshop here on Long Island. And through the magic of digital networks, I am really fortunate to be connected all the way from New Zealand with Asley Remer, head girl. And we'll find out more about that. But Asley, thanks so much for taking the time today. I always like to start out before we really roll into the main conversation to have people tell us a little bit about their background and how they got to where they are now. So if you could start us out that way, and then we'll talk about the main topic, the Girl Museum, virtual museums. So
Thank you very much, Paul, for inviting me, and it's really lovely to see you after so many years. So yes, I'm Asley Remer. I come from a completely arts background. I grew up in the theater. The theater informed my worldview about many things, mainly how arts and activism is completely intertwined. And recovering voices is necessary, but also that you need to be willing to do anything from clean the toilets to seat the guests to direct the show. And I've taken that to heart and learned so much from being a Jill of all trades. And that led me, I wouldn't say totally fearlessly, but into the endeavor of starting Girl Museum after many years of doing arts degrees and thinking I was going to be a big shot curator in the big city. And I live in New Zealand, as you've said, and I've been back and forth between the US and New Zealand since 2002. I first came here to do an internship for my master's at the Auckland Museum. And it was a delightful time because they didn't know what an intern was. They may disagree, but they really thought an intern was someone that worked in the medical field. So it was fantastic. So I could tell them that interns did not photocopy. They did not just make tea. They did really important work. And so I managed to do some really, really cool projects. And growing out of that, I did another master's in art history, and I moved back to the States to do some research, and I was living back in New York City during this very interesting time of 2008, which we may all recall was quite a year. And I had the good fortune to put out probably 150 resumes to try to find work with my fresh, shiny master's degree. And just thought, hey, I'm here, I'm going to do it now. And that's not what the city had to offer. I luckily was able to fall back on some theater and got some work volunteering quite a bit, because volunteerism has been a very strong strain throughout my entire life. Starting with my family, finding that, saying that was really important. And so I've always done it. And so I volunteered for a project called Project Shaw. And what we did was produced George Bernard Shaw play readings. And what that helped me, what segued for me from that was George Bernard Shaw was an amazing person who used his art to fight and to stick up for human rights, for the people who were getting run over, and so it just reinvigorated that idea of arts and advocacy as being quite intertwined. But also David Staller, the man that I was working with, was very inspirational. He did everything, and he did everything so amazingly and just didn't stop, and just was so driven from editing the scripts to the production of the play to handing out programs. It was that reminder that if you want to do something, you got to do it all to get it started. And so long story long, I ended up finally getting a job that on the first day that I was meant to start, the whole department was eliminated because the crash had just happened. This was at Christie's, New York. And so I just thought, okay, I really can't rely on anything. The world is going crazy. And what do I want to do? And so part of my history, I had always been interested in children's rights, children's advocacy, but especially girls. And I'd studied, women's art, always been quite a very staunch feminist. And so it just seemed very natural to go, okay, what can I do with my skill set of being an arts person, but also being an advocate. And the internet at the time, it's hard to even remember what it was like. But, we had little Nokias. There were no smartphones at that point in 2008. And so I had to really sort of dig deep and go, okay, I'm going to learn HTML. and I thought, that could at least give me another skill. So I decided sort of in a couple of months that starting a new museum was, well, like a museum, because a virtual museum didn't really exist. There were a couple, but I didn't know because Google wasn't as what Google is now. So you couldn't just say, are there any other virtual museums? It just wasn't like that. And so I workshopped the idea of Girl Museum, and quite a few of my friends were like, sounds a bit corny and dodgy. Like, no. It was a real struggle. The word girl is hard anyway for people. Sometimes my accent, but also it's so inherently pejorative to a lot of people that I work with, and so that was the first thing. But I thought, no, I'm going to take on that challenge, and but also not just make a website. Like, I wanted it to be a proper museum. That was the vision. So I did the work to start a nonprofit. So Girl Museum is a proper, legit nonprofit organization, registered in Florida. And then I embarked on learning HTML and figuring out what a virtual museum could be. What was it? And just explored that. So yeah, and then New York was not a good place to be at that time. So because I was virtual, I moved back to New Zealand, and I've been here ever since. So
well,
there you go.
there are. I think that's a really interesting story, because here, a dozen years later,
Yes,
we find ourselves in another tumultuous situation, a worldwide calamity, catastrophe, what have you. And lo and behold, for perhaps an entirely different set of reasons, there are all sorts of virtual museums and virtual exhibits sort of popping up, but maybe for lots of different reasons. I'll just say that. So I think it would. So I would say, well, and your title attached to Girl Museum is also head girl. So
yes.
I think I'd like to have you talk. I mean, it's interesting you brought up the term girl and how it often has pejorative or people think it's dismissive or that. So maybe before you launch into some words of wisdom, perhaps as an OG virtual museum founder, you could talk a little bit about the term girl and why you're head girl of Girl Museum.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, people like your good self have taken on the mantle of a non-traditional title. I love that you are the chief instigator. I think that that's brilliant, and I respect that. I respect people that are step outside of that traditional title system. Head girl is very common in the British, or like the UK, New Zealand, Australia school systems. So I thought it was just funny. It seemed quite not silly. Like I thought it was great, but it just was so curious. I met all these wonderful women when I came to New Zealand who that was something that was in their CV, that they were the head girl. And I thought, oh, well, we don't have that, but I really think I would have been a head girl. Or maybe I wouldn't have been, but I could declare myself, you know, a head girl. And that was really important, I think, to take that on, to show that I'm a grown woman, but I am not offended by this word. I'm taking back the word in the sense that the other inspiration, sorry, sideways, the other inspiration for that is my great aunt passed away years ago in her latter 90s. And in that time, in the last decade of her life, that's what she remembered was her girlhood. That's all she wanted to talk about. She didn't remember what happened 2 minutes ago, but her girlhood was so important. And that's, I think, when she felt the most free and just she did amazing things. And so that to me was sort of anecdata that our childhoods are with us all the time, and not in a boys will be boys kind of a way, but they're essential to who we are. And so I decided that wasn't going to be offensive to me if I was going to take on, I am a girl, and I want everyone who identifies as a girl to be proud of that, and not to let people use it as a weapon against them. And I think also, side note, similarly for boys, I'm never was a boy, so I can't fight for boys in the same way. I have a boy, and so I am learning and working with him on lots of things. But yeah, I can't speak for them. So for us, that's what I wanted to do, and it has gotten me into quite a few conversations with people who definitely lived through a time before I did, where they had real issues, and that word was quite weaponized against them. And I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to negate that. That's part of the museumness of us, is we respect that and honor that, and we'll take that, but it doesn't mean we aren't also going to move forward. That's another whole thing. But girls as a topic is a difficult place to be. And I'd love to say in 10 years, now going 11 years, things have gotten better. And definitely, I would say things have gotten worse. So that's unfortunate, but that's the way the world has gone. So, but for the work that I've done, I think it's been a great conversation starter. I have had people say to me, if you're going to apply for this, you need to put director. Don't say you're the head girl. And definitely on some forms, you don't have the choice. But I try to, stick to our naming system as much as possible.
Well, and your mission, and like you said, this fundamental ethos about girls and girlhood, which is great, which is a perfect segue into, so maybe you could talk a little bit about specifically Girl Museum now, and how it's structured and how people can access it. I think that's really interesting, and also I'll just say now, and not just save it for the end. Of course, we want to give people contact information, not only so that they can experience Girl Museum, but they should support you also. So I'll just say that if they're able, and I think that would be a great thing. But so yeah, just talk a little bit. I mean, how is the current structure of Girl Museum, and sort of what does that even mean? You are a totally virtual museum, so do you have exhibits? Do you have galleries? Do you have temporary exhibits? Give us the sort of deep dive into the sort of current operational premise of Girl Museum.
Okay. To explain the current, I'll do a brief evolution, just because it definitely has evolved. My initial idea was we would have no physical presence whatsoever, because to start a website cost just a little bit more than nothing. And that's what I had. So I thought, no, I'm going to keep this as tight as possible so that I can work and support this project. And so that's all it was. But I was obsessed at the beginning with making it look like a real museum. Like I wanted the header to look like a, beautiful Greek, I wanted people to feel like they were, and I had to get over that because it isn't. That's just nonsense. But so we would not have a collection. That was my other thing. You have to have something to put something in. And I thought, okay, if we ever did collect things, it would be digital images or digital something, files of whatever kind. And so that has evolved a bit. We currently do have a few physical objects that people have given us, but they are most like contemporary art pieces. So it's not problematic in how we can store them. So, and we've also been given quite a few digital images. So that has changed. In terms of physical, within I think 2 years of starting, we had our first physical. So I said I would never do it, and then we did it. I got
You call yourself a museum, people want to give you stuff. That's just how it works.
Well, yes, it was interesting because so I got a grant to go to Japan to do research on Girls' Day, Hinamatsuri, and I took took photos, videos, and bought tons of stuff, and then went, oh, it'd be really cool to show people this. And very luckily, New Zealand, both the capital in Wellington and Auckland had Japanese festivals. And so I got another little grant to produce a physical exhibition for both. And I worked with the Japanese embassy and was able to borrow some of their really amazing dolls, and because it's a doll festival. And so, yeah, it was amazing and so difficult because I have worked in proper museums. I know how hard it is to do the real. And I thought, oh, why am I doing this? Just even the management of people and knowing that now, because my first job out of university was as a security guard at the Met. So security has always been my first kind of
You really came by your museum bona fides the legit way.
Hey, if someone wants to pay me, I have a book to write about my time at the Met. I learned so much about how people interact with art, how people interact with each other in the presence of art, in controlled and confined and curated spaces. It is a fascinating place to grow up in a professional sense. But anyway, so we did this physical thing, and it was great. It was very successful. But then we ended up, we had an activity table where people could make, cranes and things like that. And then I thought, I have all this stuff, but we don't exist. How do we reconcile this? And I was able to find a designer who took all of our cranes. They had wishes written inside of them. And so she took the wishes and made them into a virtual crane. So when you clicked on it, the crane opened up and so we were able to have the virtual become the physical and then integrate back some of the physical into the virtual, which I found really satisfying. And we haven't done that as such since, and I would love to do that again in the right situation. So so that moving forward, the website became woefully inadequate and I had to get more help. And so we developed that. It got a little bit better. Within the first year, I put out an ad for interns because that's what I knew of how to get to get more experience for myself, but also I believe in education and I wanted to help bring people along on this crazy journey that I was on. And so I put an ad at Leicester because that's where I think everyone puts their first ads. And one of the 5 interns that started with me in January 2010 is still with me. She is now the editor-in-chief of our website.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And we've grown up together. She's had a child. I've had a child. We've gone through this amazing time and we've never met.
This is the perfect virtual museum story. This is the real virtual museum story. I'm just going to say that. So, so
Sorry,
now,
so now,
if somebody came to Girl Museum,
yes,
and
yeah.
of
So
course
now,
they're going to come to it through the web.
yeah,
What,
yeah.
I mean, what
What
goes on
happens?
in Girl Museum?
Right. So now we have our original 4 streams of exhibitions. So girlhood in art, the art of girlhood, girls in the world, and girls speak. So those have different focuses: art history, anthropology, contemporary social issues, and then Girls Speak is our more collaborative and community engagement series. So we have 30, I think, exhibitions and projects spread throughout those sections. So nothing is temporary. So once it's up, it's up. So all of our exhibitions are permanent. We have a series that's every 2 years called the Heroine's Quilt. So it was like a quilt project where people could contribute their girlhood heroine, and we made it into a little quilt. And now that every other year is a contemporary art series. So we're highlighting not necessarily girl artists, but artists that look at girlhood. So that's grown completely from one of the interns saying, I'm really interested in contemporary art. How can we make that work? So we've got those things. We've got podcasts. We've got all of the usual suspects of social media stuff. That's the biggest thing that's happened since I started. So there was no social media. Facebook literally kind of launched right around the start of this, and nobody wanted to be involved with that. So if only we'd known. So we grew up with all these different social media platforms, and we've picked and chosen which ones. We've had some and got rid of others. So when you come to Girl Museum, it's still like a regular museum in that you can choose your own adventure. You can go, oh, I'm really interested in art. So it's pretty clear where you're going to find the art. I'm really interested in how other girls live. And then there's lots of, those sorts of things. I had a great story with a group that came to me that had never heard of Girl Museum, and they had heard of us from a class the guy was teaching in Cairo. Like he said something about virtual museums, and one of the students said, oh no, I know of a good virtual museum, Girl Museum. And he'd never heard of it. And I didn't know we had Egyptian constituency. So, so excited. So it's those sorts of little things, how we find out about what goes on. So anyway, we have at the moment, I'll say with what's been happening, we anticipated higher visitation because people were going to be at home. We didn't anticipate, but it quickly became clear that there was a real world need in terms of what we do. So that's worked on so many levels. We have, I believe, 15 senior staff at this point. We had 26 interns going into COVID. Many of our senior staff and interns that we already had lost their jobs or were furloughed, depending on where they were. And so suddenly they had more time and they wanted to do more with us as a contact point, but also to reach out. We had interns contact us who had left years ago, who wanted to come back and write for us and be involved. We thought so that it became this very supportive group within our own organization. But then we had other people writing to us saying, what, we don't understand what's going on, for girls, how does that, how can you respond? And so we've started researching and writing about what's happening now. But the other real world thing, of course, is graduates, students need to do internships. And oh my goodness, I believe this new cohort, we will have 39 interns when they start.
Oh.
Yeah, and that will be the extent of our capacity, really, to meaningfully manage them. Because people come to us with lots of skills and passion. And so we talk to them about doing some things that they're already good at and get better, and the other things they want to learn how to do, and work it that way. But in terms of a visitor, there's quite a few types of things you can do. You can visit the exhibitions. You can, if you're an educator, we have all of our exhibitions have curriculum attached to it, have education guides to UK and US curriculum. We've recently had quite a few of our education guides translated into French because we had a French intern and she wanted to do that. So we really a lot of our growth has been through the interaction with the people that have come to us and said, this is something I have to offer. Let's make this even better. We have so many exhibitions in production, in research phase. We have about 5 years planned out so far.
One thing that is clear, since none of your exhibitions are temporary, you are. I've heard somebody describe, digital possibilities, like being able to create an infinite label, which sounds horrifying to me. But the idea of an infinite museum actually sounds really interesting. So you sort of have that capacity. You are just continually growing and expanding and creating a further reach, which is really cool, and obviously is something that probably couldn't happen in any other way other than in a virtual museum.
Well, yeah, exactly. And we've had feedback from people that have used our exhibitions as research for so many different things that I never thought they would be useful for, that it became clear that not taking things down was going to be really important, first of all. Second of all, we had 2 projects. One was Girl for Sale that looked at, that we talked about. No. Did we talk about that? Because John West Bay and I worked on that together.
I know about that project. So
right. So we had that project, and that was a standalone URL. So that, because we wanted it to be its own thing, and also because this was a collaboration between Girl Museum and the American Poetry Museum. So it was, at the time, we saw that as the best way to do the collab. It became difficult to maintain financially separately, but then ultimately it was hacked, and so that's what ended up for me. And I told John, like, I will just rebuild this on our website so it's safe. And little did I know it wasn't safe, but that's another story. And then we had another project that I worked on with Te Papa, the National Museum here in New Zealand, called Kiwi Chicks, New Zealand Girl History. And that was very necessarily its own URL as well. And that was a 5-year project. And then I think we got a couple-year extension funding wise, and then that was done. And so I've had to subsume that and recreate it in a different way on our site. So it doesn't function exactly the same, but as I say, that any museum exhibition, things break, you've got to figure out how to redo it. And so
what's plan B and plan C and plan D sometimes.
Totally.
Well,
exactly.
Boy, I'll tell you, if you and your work and the people working with you aren't a testimony to dedication and a can-do spirit, I don't know what is. And maybe that is actually a great balm for the times we're in right now, since you came out of your whole project came out of a difficult time. Maybe in our waning moments here, I'll give you a chance to really put on your head girl hat and with the value of both hindsight and knowing that you just said you have at least, sounds like you have at least 5 years of projects that you're already planning and looking ahead to. I mean, especially since you may be, and who knows, I don't think either one of us is going to fact check, but let's say if you were not the first real virtual museum project, you were certainly one of the first. So let's just say that. But what sort of words of advice or
Mm.
wisdom or encouragement or all three would you offer to people, especially now that so many museums and museum professionals are like literally closed
Mm.
out of their situations, and so of course are looking to reach people virtually and via the web. What might you have to say for, and also for people, hey, who might be now even more inspired to think of the idea of a virtual museum now that they hear you talk about Girl Museum? What kinds of parting words here might you offer to people, sort of things to latch onto or think about that you think are important?
Okay. Um, the biggest thing is the takeaway for me of this moment is virtual offerings in the museum world are not add-ons. They're not to be thought of as an afterthought. They're not to be thrown on and said, oh, should we do that? And not resourced in every way. We still fight for the ability to apply for grants. We don't qualify under the current AAM and ICOM definitions, even though the ICOM definition is in flux. We're not real because we don't have a building.
You're not a museum, no matter
Yes.
what you say.
Exactly. And so, and a lot of projects have fallen over because they've gotten a space just to fit the criteria, and then the money runs out and then the space bankrupts them. So I'd say, don't saddle yourself. If you want to start something, don't saddle yourself with something you can't afford to run yourself for 5 years. But for the industry, we need to embrace what this is, because these connections are real, for good or bad. They are real, and they've become even more important over the past few months, or they've been evidenced to be more important. And so I hope that going forward, museums invest more in the digital side of things, because also they can see that people can do their work from home, and we can reduce issues of, effective climate and, transfer, all of these things going forward. There's so much to learn from it. But I hesitate to say everyone should go start a nonprofit, because it is very hard work, and there are already a lot of nonprofits. So if I was someone who wanted to get involved, I would look and see if something like what I want to do exists already, and see if I can become a part of that. Because the world, it's not that we don't have space, but more so and more so, we're all going to be competing for the same smaller, shrinking pots of money. And unfortunately, in the parts of the world that governments don't fund arts organizations, although even in those parts of the world, those pots of money are going to be shrinking as well.
Well, thank goodness that's not a problem in the United States. Sorry, I just felt compelled to say that.
It was a good joke, Paul.
COVID-19 humor.
Yes, it's dark and sometimes necessary. So yeah, that's really would be my words of wisdom. Is it's very hard. It's hard work. I should say, we are all volunteer. We've all been volunteer from the beginning, and everyone knows that's who and what we are. And even if we got a big chunk of money, I can't say I would start salarizing people, because we have so much work to do, and we're all dedicated to the work. So you have to have the passion and the self-motivation to do a virtual anything. So I think it's about self-reflection and making sure what it is. If you are a real extrovert that needs the people space in a museum context, then it's really not going to be satisfying for you. I'm borderline on it. I work jobs to help pay for this. I haven't had to fund Girl Museum for a few years. We've been able to raise, just enough money to cover our costs. But for example, because we have more people visiting, it costs us more to run the website. So if more people that are visiting want to, give us $5, then it helps us literally keep it going. So even the virtual costs, even though they're much lower, they aren't as cheap as they used to be, especially to get quality. Because, and so, and I'm meant to wind up. I'll just say we were hacked in 3 years ago on International Women's Day. Quite a few women's and girls organizations were hacked as a celebration of some kind, and so that was a real lesson to us. But that cost so much money. We did it all ourselves. We rebuilt it all ourselves. But to get a secure website and a secure hosting so that we don't have to worry about that anymore is very expensive. And so it's all relative, but yeah, it's a hard time to make a big decision, but at the same time, it really is it's a good time to reflect on those big decisions that you might want to make going forward. For graduates and for people that are just starting out, my heart goes out to them. I wish we had room for more interns. Check back with us in the fall, because our internships are 3 months, but then lots of people stay over. So there'll be some new projects that are looking for people to work on them. So we're www.girlmuseum.org. And
we'll make sure
put it
that as they say on the bumper slide at the end,
yes.
and in now I've gotten so used to this, in the description below
yes.
we'll put any resources or links that you think, so that people can find out more about Girl Museum and everyone's work and how to support you. I think that would be great. Well, Asley, all these conversations are, this is like my pandemic project. This is an opportunity for me to chat with people that I really admire and stuff, and that's certainly the case here. And it's also really meant to be, even though this is being filmed during the pandemic, I really am thinking about, what are evergreen topics? What are topics that will be meaningful to people after this is all over? Or, this topic will be just as meaningful, and the things you had to say about it, I think, will be just as meaningful, 6 months, a year, 2 years from now. So I really appreciate you taking the time. And as always, I have to thank, especially in this case, the web gods for behaving themselves as
Definitely.
we're making the connection between Long Island and New Zealand. They behaved themselves remarkably well. There were just one little nervous spit there, but it was just a minor glitch. So I was like, ooh,
good.
okay.
Good.
So no, I'll be happy to include, obviously, the link to the website and ways for people to contact you, and then also other resources or things related to the conversation that you think would be helpful to.
Sounds good.
Well, thanks again. Good.
Thank you.
Good. You'll actually be opening, if you haven't already, opening real museums, I guess, in New Zealand. So
I think Te Papa opened yesterday. Yep.
Yeah. So that's great. So
we'll
maybe
see.
There's some lessons for us to learn further, several time zones away, as we're, I think, further away from that, it seems. So, all right. Well, be well. Best to you and your family. And again, thank you so much for taking the time.
Cheers. Thank you, Paul.